I'd like to try to bridge the gap between those extraordinary stories, even those extraordinary Old and New Testament stories, and our story. Because the principle is the same. The principle is the same. That in your life, when you look back on your life, let me tell you what you're going to look back on. You're not going to look back on, well, I had a 5-year goal and I accomplished my 5-year goal, then I went to the next 5-year goal. I mean, I'm all for goal setting, but that's not the story you're going to tell. The story that you're going to tell when you tell your children your story, or if you have the opportunity to tell your grandchildren your story, you're going to tell a story about opportunities came along. And you sensed God moving you to take advantage of those opportunities, and you were scared to death because there was risk involved. And taking advantage of those opportunities, in other words, those individual single acts of courage, will be the tipping point in your personal life for the things that God does. That's extraordinary. And no one may ever read your story, and they'll never make a book, make a movie about your story, and it's not going to be a David and Goliath kind of thing. You're not going to be a high-profile leader, perhaps. But when you tell your story is going to contain this same dynamic. There will be moments when an extraordinary, in your world, extraordinary, an extraordinary step of faith, we call them, an extraordinary act of obedience, we call it, an extraordinary expression of courage will be the tipping point for perhaps the extraordinary thing that God wants to do in your life. And here's my desire for you. I don't want you to miss it. I don't want you to look back and say, if only I had. And I don't want there to be such a gulf between the heroics of King David and Moses and Abraham and those larger than life Old Testament characters. I don't want the gap to be so large that you look at their story and say, yeah, well, if I was in their situation, when in fact, you'll face some Red Seas of your own. You know that. You'll face some Goliaths of your own. You know that. You'll face some moments when you're going to want to back down because of terror of your own. And in those moments, your decision, whether or not you obey, whether or not you step out, will really determine whether or not you miss the defining moments of your life, the opportunities that perhaps God wanted to use to do something extraordinary through you. Because when you look back on the extraordinary work of God in your life, I promise you, there will be fear involved. There will be courage involved. And you'll look back and say, that's exactly right. There was a tipping point. And what hung in the balance was a mystery, but part of what hung in the balance was my willingness to step out and say yes to God when all the circumstances around me said, don't you dare take that much of a risk.